Maybe if you're trying to convince the general public that these boys are innocent, don't quote a mob movie in which they then beat up a bunch of bikers at a bar.
Because if you don't do that, once you're in court, now you just can't leave.
And it seems quite obvious to me that this lawyer, instead of, presenting evidence that would help exonerate them in the public eye, like showing the actual security cam footage of when they came home or the text messages with Katie. No. Instead, we're going to keep it focused on race, which you can see by this clip.
People are pushing the narrative of, oh, this is a race thing. Well, obviously it's not. I mean, this is like a brother to us. I mean, Nolan's no different than anyone else in our group. I think it's so criminal that they took something so anti-racist and flipped it into something super racist. Like they took, this is the definition of anti-racism. I mean, that we did not look at Nolan any different than I looked at him, or even you.
Okay, first off, that even you was wild. It's quite clear from that sentence that Jax has never had an actual conversation about racism in his entire life. I was friends with a black person. That's the most anti-racist anybody's ever been. This situation was the most unracist thing that's ever existed. It's the media. They're the ones making this racist. No, you don't understand what that means. It means your story doesn't hold water, and when people called you out on it and called out the investigation on not even investigating, that is systematic racism. It's very, very clear to me that the lawyer is the one telling them to keep the focus on race. Because you can see the lawyer and the gears in his head turning and nodding and agreeing along with all of the racial stuff. And you can see him kind of being like, yeah, okay, that's what I'm saying, yeah. So it's very clear that that was one of the bullet points that the lawyer told them to hit home over. And another one was the Coast Guard. Why would I call the Coast Guard if I knew he was dead? I called the Coast Guard right away. First off, you didn't. You waited till 11 o'clock. Second, it's not like the Coast Guard searched for him that night. Warren clung to that like it was a safety raft.
I think from the beginning, I'm glad that I called the Coast Guard. It would have been completely different. I'm glad I called the Coast Guard.
It's like, I'm sorry, Warren, but it's actually way more suspicious that you called the Coast Guard. Because first, you didn't want to call the Coast Guard when you guys were sinking. And then for some reason, you assumed that Nolan was still out on the island at 11 o'clock at night. Why wouldn't you assume that he came back with the person he was supposed to come back with and something happened to him in transit? Because no reasonable person would think that he was still out on the island, in my opinion. Because in your own words, Warren, you said you didn't talk to Katie till the next day. And then speaking of the island, the lawyer tries to say that by them going to the island and looking around, that it absolutely exonerates them and that the narrative couldn't be this, and ends it with a wild statement, mind you.
People who have been sucking up way more oxygen than they're entitled to have not been to the island. I'm willing to bet that a lot of the hustlers and profiteers and liars have not been to that island. And you have to go to that island. And being at the island today was revelatory. It was really illuminating. It's a very dynamic marine environment, first of all. But when you go to the island, you see instantly that what some people want to be true, what they wish to be true, they're trying to wish it to be true. They're trying to make it true through their lies. It's actually not possible. It is a very, very long and narrow barrier island. It's basically very low sand dunes. And the particular part of the island that we're dealing with, there are no trees. It's hardly any foliage, hardly any tree cover, hardly any plants, and it's wide open. And on July 4th, there were thousands of people there. There is no possible way that anybody could have committed a murder in broad daylight.
Murder? Who's saying anything about a murder? Most of us are under the assumption that an accident happened and they covered it up. All of this stuff that they keep trying to point to as evidence that they didn't do anything to him are not actually evidence. You know what is evidence? The security cam footage. Explain to us why the grandfather was the one who canceled the sea tow. How about that? And what I see is just a complete lack of responsibility with these boys, because listen to this phrasing.
I wish we would have never, I think about this every day, I wish we would have never went out on the 4th of July, because I know this wouldn't have happened.
You see, instead of saying, I should have made sure my friend got home safely, they said, I wish we had never gone out. And I have to admit, my little antennas buzzed a little when it sounded like he was going to say, I knew this was going to happen, right? That seems like what he was going to say. It wasn't, maybe we shouldn't have been underage drinking. They literally say, we did everything right.
I mean, there's not much I would change from my point of view and my friend's point of view. I think we did everything right, and I know we did nothing wrong.
Those are not the words of somebody who lost their brother, their best friend, a month ago. And I lost one of my closest friends in a suspicious way, I blamed myself, even though I hadn't even physically seen her in a couple years. And for those of you guys saying that Jax is the one that people should press, I fully disagree. He is the one that I think is the scariest out of these interviews. Watch the way he looks at Warren during this moment.
We live in a very tight-knit community, and for people to, push back and say these things when they know what Ocean Springs is like, it's really hard. And I mean, I don't think I haven't had many personal encounters, but I know being around the
Oh, he felt like he was saying something to Warren. Because let's not forget, it was his grandparents' house that they all got together at. It was his grandparents' house that they went back to and thus should have security cam footage from. And out of all of them, Jax is the one that is holding his body in a different way, who is more controlled, more level-headed. If these kids were truly looking to exonerate themselves, they would actually start addressing some of these questions, like, who was the fourth boat? Why were all of you huddled up out there together? Who drove the fucking Palm Beach? Boy, they really didn't want you to see this video because they made it ineligible immediately so you wouldn't see it. So let's go through a speed run of the information. We can now definitively say that this is Jax. We can also now definitively say that this is Morgan. He's wearing the same hat as well as the same bracelets. So where were they on the Triton? Now that we've got a much clearer video thanks to Officer Tatum, it's obvious that there is nobody in an orange swimsuit or a paisley swimsuit on this boat. We also barely see that there's somebody here in the red shorts. Now in this Katie Snapchat picture, I've been saying that there was somebody in the background here wearing red shorts. So I pumped up the exposure and as you can see, it certainly looks like it. They seemingly have similar body types as well as similar hairlines. We also know that whoever was in the red shorts was also on the shoreline when the fight broke out. Now who was involved in that fight? Warren's brother, Carter. Carter, who trains in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And by Warren's own admission, his brother put someone in an arm bar. And in case you don't know what that looks like, go ahead and look at that placement on the back of the head there. Spot look familiar? Given Carter's height, build, body type, this looks like it could be him. But one blurry, underexposed picture is not solid proof of anything, right? But we know Warren grabbed his younger brother and had him come over hang out with them on their boat as they were sinking or whatever. And it would be pretty bad for their case if this was Carter on the Triton and then on Katie's boat at 6 o'clock. But now my attention turns to this person who a lot of people think is Bart. But in his hand, he is holding a cell phone. So I thought, why would Bart jump from his boat to the other boat holding a cell phone when other people have cell phones in their hands while Wyatt is on the phone in the picture? So while I was trying to compare pictures of Bart to the person on the boat that I can't identify, I found this picture with him with a tattoo from about 2 years ago. And it wasn't until just today that I stopped looking at the tattoo and I started looking at his wrist. Because someone in the background of this picture has always stuck out to me because my instinct always was like, is that Bart? Bart seemingly has a pretty pronounced mullet as according to this picture. But this was definitely not on Bart's boat. I checked the seating and the covers, like it's not Bart's boat. Now I think you pretty much get where I'm going with this because then I remembered this bracelet. Pretty unique bracelet. Unique like the bracelet that Bart Jr. was wearing in that tattoo picture. And right here looks like it might be the tail end of a tattoo that wraps around the forearm, right in the same place that it would be on Bart. I've said for a while now that the story about them calling Bart that morning to go out on the boat never made sense, because what 21-year-old didn't already have plans for 4th of July? So then the question is, who is driving Bart's boat? Which brings me back to this guy who some people have thought looked like Bart. However, we do know that he was on Bart's boat handing out drinks to people in that 7-second clip we've seen. Same hair, same glasses, same hat. By the way, did y'all know that Bart has a younger brother? The family resemblance is very striking. I mean, the real difference is that he's a little bit shorter and has a squarer jaw. And does anybody want to guess what his younger brother's name is? Brooks.
An 18-year-old, a skilled swimmer, a college athlete. He spent the 4th of July on an island with the people closest to him. Everyone else made it back. Nolan didn't. Now, one of the friends who was there has finally broken his silence. But what he said in front of the camera doesn't line up cleanly with what the evidence shows. Don't click away yet. Stay with this, because the deeper you go, the more this case doesn't add up. 3 p.m. is the last moment anyone has publicly confirmed seeing Nolan alive. The boat carrying his friends didn't pull away from the island until 4:30. That's a 90-minute window, on a small island, surrounded by people who knew him, that nobody has been able to fully account for. Let's rewind to the start of that day, because that gap matters more than anything else in this story. At 9:56 that morning, the group pushed off from a private dock in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Warren Hudson, one of Nolan's close friends, later put the group's size at somewhere between 20 and 30 people, split across 3 boats, heading out to Horn Island to celebrate the 4th. Horn Island was packed. Thousands of visitors show up there every year for the holiday. Boats everywhere, music playing, people swimming, the whole scene. Warren says Nolan was in a great mood that morning, laughing, joking around, nothing out of the ordinary. On its face, that's an unremarkable day. Friends, sunshine, water, a holiday. Nothing about it should raise an eyebrow. Except Horn Island itself creates a problem. It's a barrier island out in the Gulf. No permanent residents, no buildings, next to no infrastructure, and critically, no security cameras. Just sand and open water. Which means, if something happened out there, the only people who know are the people who were there. There's no footage to pull, no outside witnesses to check the story against. Just the accounts of the people who made the trip, and whatever they choose to say. This is where the timeline gets murky. Judge Ashley Cole, Warren Hudson's mother, has said Warren last saw Nolan around 3 p.m. That's the most recent confirmed sighting that's been made public. After that, nothing. No confirmed location, no confirmed activity, no outside witness who can say where Nolan was. Warren's account of what happened next is straightforward. The group started packing up to leave. They asked Nolan more than once to get on the boat, and he said no. According to Warren, Nolan wanted to stay behind with a young woman he'd met that day, Katie McCormack. That's the friend's version. Nolan made his own choice to stay. Nolan's family sees it very differently. They maintain he intended to leave with everyone else, and that staying alone on the island wasn't something he'd have done. And then there's a third complication. Katie McCormack's own family has pushed back on parts of the story being told about her role that day. The full details haven't been made public, but the disagreement matters, because Katie is the reason given for why Nolan supposedly stayed behind. So you've got 3 accounts that can't all be fully true at once. The friends say he stayed for Katie. Katie's family disputes elements of that. Nolan's family says he never planned to stay at all. Nobody has publicly said where Nolan was at 3:15, or 3:30, or 4 o'clock. That's the 90-minute hole in this story. Here's how the pieces line up. 3 o'clock, last confirmed sighting of Nolan. 4 o'clock, a distress call goes out from the boat, reporting a broken bilge pump. The caller states there are 7 people aboard. 4:30, the boat departs Horn Island. Officials say Nolan was not on it. His friends say that was his own decision. So, officially, Nolan wasn't there. But the distress call put 7 people on that boat, and nobody has ever fully explained who those 7 were, how that count was reached, or how it squares with Nolan supposedly being left behind. Something in that math doesn't work, and the public still doesn't know what. 90 minutes, on a crowded island, with thousands of people around, and still no confirmed account of where Nolan actually was. No call for help. It gets harder to make sense of from here. Nolan wasn't reported missing until that night, after the group had already made it back to the mainland. Nobody called for a welfare check before leaving the island. Nobody called during the ride back. Nobody flagged it to authorities that a friend might still be out there. There was no, "Hey, can someone go check on him?" Nothing, until hours later, once everyone was already home. Maybe they assumed he had another ride. Maybe they figured he was fine. Maybe it was a simple misunderstanding. Maybe. But an assumption isn't an answer. The real question isn't what the group thought that night. It's what they actually knew. And with 90 minutes still unaccounted for, the people who were on that island may be the only ones who can fill in that gap. So here's where we stand. 90 minutes nobody has explained. A boat that left without anyone calling for a welfare check, and a young man whose body wasn't recovered for 2 more days. From here, the question isn't just where Nolan was, it's what happened to him, and what his body could tell investigators. On July 6, 2026, 2 days after the holiday, search teams recovered Nolan Xavier Wells from the water near western Horn Island. That discovery shifted the investigation into a new phase. There was now physical evidence to work with. The state conducted its own examination, but the district attorney had those findings sealed pending grand jury review. No cause of death has been made public. No conclusions have been released. Nolan's family didn't wait on that process. They brought in attorney Ben Crump and commissioned an independent examination led by Dr. Roger Mitchell. His preliminary conclusion, cause and manner of death remain undetermined. That word, undetermined, doesn't mean accidental, and it doesn't mean natural. It means the available evidence wasn't enough to draw a firm conclusion. Multiple possibilities remain open. Dr. Mitchell did note one specific finding: red discoloration on the back of Nolan's head. Ben Crump later described it publicly as roughly 12 by 8 inches, located toward the lower skull. Forensic pathologist Dr. Kendall Von Crowns, who isn't connected to the case, weighed in on what that could mean: either normal post-mortem changes or evidence of an injury to the head or neck. Those are very different explanations, and the discoloration alone doesn't confirm either one. Dr. Mitchell said he couldn't determine the cause conclusively. He documented it and moved forward with the exam. Here's the part worth slowing down for. When someone is recovered from water, examiners closely check the airway and the small bones and tissue around the throat. Those structures can indicate whether the neck sustained an injury and can help establish what happened before the person entered the water. Dr. Mitchell looked for those structures in Nolan's case. They weren't there. Think about what that means. A medical examiner working an unresolved death with key neck evidence unavailable to review. Dr. Mitchell documented that he couldn't rule out a neck injury, couldn't determine whether Nolan was conscious when he entered the water, and couldn't establish how he ended up there. He wrote that Nolan's condition immediately before entering the water was the central unanswered question, and that some of the evidence needed to answer it simply wasn't available. He also stated he could not rule out non-accidental causes. That's not proof of a homicide. It's a medical finding about what couldn't be excluded. The state's own findings might address these same questions, but the public can't see that report. It's still sealed, and there's no way to know whether it agrees or conflicts with the independent exam. The toxicology report is sealed too. A fake version circulated on social media and was later debunked by officials. The real report has never been released. So right now, the state's exam is sealed. The independent exam couldn't pin down a cause. There's unexplained discoloration, with more than one possible explanation, and there are missing neck structures that limited what doctors could determine. None of that closes the case. If anything, it opens up more questions. And next, the story turns to Warren Hudson himself. Before we go further, if you haven't subscribed, now's a good time. Subscribe now. This channel is built around following the timeline, checking the contradictions, and keeping speculation separate from fact. On August 11, 2026, more than a month after Nolan's body was recovered, Warren Hudson sat for an interview, alongside friends Jack Spatola and Morgan Seymour, with a law enforcement officer present. It was the first time any of them had spoken publicly since July 4th. Warren's account, piece by piece. He says Nolan seemed happy and relaxed that day, but he also admits he wasn't watching Nolan closely. With hundreds of people on the island, he was moving around, talking to different groups. He says the group tried multiple times to get Nolan on the boat, and that one person in particular became visibly worried, yelling for Nolan to get aboard. Nolan, according to Warren, still refused, wanting more time with Katie McCormack. Warren directly denied any involvement in Nolan's death. He also denied that anyone tampered with Nolan's phone. He and Jack described facing threats and intense public scrutiny since the story broke. That's the account as given. Now, the parts that don't fully hold together. Katie McCormack is central to Warren's explanation, but her family disputes elements of it, and the full picture hasn't been made public. That undercuts the main reason given for why Nolan supposedly stayed behind. Then there's the missing call. Warren says the group was concerned about Nolan, but nobody contacted the Coast Guard, Marine Patrol, or any authority. No welfare check, no warning, nothing. If people are genuinely worried about a friend, that's usually a phone call away. That call never came. When Nolan's phone was returned to his family, his Snapchat activity for July 4th was reportedly empty. No photos, no videos, nothing from the entire day. His mother has said documenting his day-to-day was completely normal for him, which makes a blank 4th of July stand out. Warren's explanation is that phones commonly got left on the boats that day, and Nolan's was among them, untouched by anyone else. Body language analyst Susan Constantine reviewed the interview footage and said she observed cues she associated with possible deception, particularly around Warren's comments about the phone. Worth flagging clearly, that kind of analysis isn't scientific proof of lying. It's one expert's interpretation of behavior, not evidence of wrongdoing. Still, the blank phone, reportedly left accessible on a boat other people could reach, remains an open question. You may have already heard about the audio from the distress call and the debate over a voice in the background. The short version, Ben Crump has said the voice belongs to Nolan, arguing with someone aboard over getting his phone back. Javon Williams disputes that, saying the voice actually belongs to Trayston Shepard, who was trying to defuse an unrelated argument, a claim Shepard has backed up himself. Two directly conflicting explanations for the same recording, and no independent audio analysis to settle it. Over a month after Nolan was found, Warren Hudson and Jack Spatola went back to Horn Island with attorneys, retracing parts of their route from July 4th. Why, exactly, hasn't been explained publicly. We don't know what they were looking for or expected to find. People process grief differently, and that's worth acknowledging. But a return trip to the scene, accompanied by lawyers, is the kind of detail that's going to draw attention regardless of intent. By the end of Warren's hour-plus interview, the core contradictions were still standing: the phone, the disputed voice, and a grand jury that hadn't ruled. As of now, no charges have been filed in connection with Nolan's death, no cause of death has been confirmed publicly, no toxicology report has been released, and most of the evidence remains sealed pending grand jury review. That grand jury will eventually weigh interviews, medical findings, toxicology, and the rest of the investigative file, and answer one question: does the evidence support criminal charges, and if so, against whom? It's worth remembering there are two separate examinations here. The state's report exists, but hasn't been released. The independent report, from Dr. Mitchell, has been made public, and states the cause remains undetermined. Whether the two agree is still unknown, and until the sealed material comes out, that gap will keep generating questions. The waiting period has gotten ugly. Multiple people have reportedly faced charges for making threats, targeting a judge, a witness, and local officials connected to the case. None of those individuals appear to be connected to Nolan, his family, or the friend group. They're members of the public whose anger crossed a legal line. Officials have publicly urged calm. That escalation doesn't tell us anything about guilt or innocence, but it does say something about how much distrust has built up around this case. There's also a broader context that's shaped the public reaction. Nolan Wells was black, the friends in his group were white, and this took place in Mississippi. That combination became part of the national conversation, drew media coverage, and brought Ben Crump into the case, all against a longer history that shapes how people respond to official explanations, especially when a black teenager goes missing and the first explanation offered is that he chose to stay behind. That context doesn't answer what happened, it doesn't establish guilt, and it doesn't establish innocence. Only the evidence can do that. But it explains why trust in this process has frayed so badly. Through all of this, Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, has kept her message consistent. She wants answers. Not the online arguments, not the politics, not the threats, just the truth about what happened to her son. Ben Crump's team is still working the independent investigation. The audio review is ongoing. The medical review is ongoing. The last thing Christine heard from her son was, "I love you." That's still the last clear thing she has. No speculation, no dramatics, just what's still unanswered. Who was actually aboard the boat during the distress call? What happened between 3 o'clock and 4:30? Whose voice is in the background of that recording? Why was Nolan's Snapchat reportedly blank that day? What caused the discoloration on the back of his head? Why were key neck structures missing from the examination? Did Nolan choose to stay on Horn Island, or was he left there? 6 questions, no public answers yet. Nolan went to an island with his closest friends for the 4th of July. They all came home. He didn't. 2 days later, his body was recovered from the water. The independent exam couldn't determine a cause. The state's evidence is still sealed. One friend has now spoken on camera, and the contradictions are still there. The phone, the audio, the 90-minute gap, and a grand jury that hasn't ruled. This isn't resolved. When the next update comes, from the grand jury or from evidence being unsealed, we'll cover it the same way, document by document, contradiction by contradiction. Nolan Wells deserves answers. His family deserves the truth. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next update.